We are here today. We're going to read you the story about Jericho. All right.
What's it called?
This one's called The Warrior Leader. So if you have your own books, the Jesus Storybook Bible, here's how it starts. We start on page 108. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
The Warrior Leader. Joshua in the Battle of Jericho, from Joshua 3 and 6. After Moses died, God gave his people a new leader. His name was Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Joshua was going to lead God's people into the special land God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around in that baking desert for 40 years.
That's so yacht.
It is so. So you can imagine how sick they were of sand and anything yellow and tents and walking and being hot, and how happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and to see their beautiful new home right there in front of them, all cool and green and lovely. There was only one problem: Jericho. Jericho was a city, but it wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped anyone from getting into the land. The people looked at Jericho, a big, giant, scary walls all around it, and the tall, towering ramparts, and the heavy iron gates bolted shut at each other. See? Here's our town. Look at those big walls.
And they look spooky.
They look spooky. They look almost impossible to get through. What would they do? No one knew, but God knew, and God told Joshua what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised, because it was a very odd battle plan indeed. Then God made his people a promise: I will always be with you, and I will never, ever leave you. And if you do what I say, your lives in the new land will be happy, and everything will go well. So Joshua gathered his army together, and they had swords and spears and shields. They were ready to fight, but the plan wasn't about fighting. It was about trusting and doing what God said. Joshua's army went marching around the city, day after day after day. See, here's our city, and they marched around the city, day after day after day.
After day after day after day.
That's right. They were too scared to fight, the people in Jericho said. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. On the seventh day, God told his people to march around the city not once, but 7 times. Then God told everyone to make as much noise as they could. Has anyone ever told you to make as much noise as you can? Well, imagine that noise and add 39,999 other people making that noise too. You get the idea. It's ear splitting. And as it turns out, stone splitting too, because the huge, strong walls of Jericho just crumbled to the ground as if they were made of sand, and Jericho vanished into the great cloud of dust. See? Here they are. They're making so much noise, and the walls came down. So it was that God's people entered their new home, and they didn't have to fight anyone to get in. They only had to walk. Joshua said, God has brought you safely here. Now will you do what he says? And everyone said, we promise.
I love you.
I love you. Only God can make your hearts happy, Joshua said. So don't pray to any pretend gods. No, they said, never, never.
Never.
I'm afraid they didn't keep that promise, though. They didn't do what God said, and many years later, just as God had warned them, things would go badly for God's people. They would lose their home, and enemies would capture them and take them off as slaves, and God's people would scatter into many different lands. But God's plan was still working. One day he would give his people another leader and add another home. But this home no one could ever take away from them. You see? Yep, so here's our last picture. There's the people. They seem to be relaxing and celebrating.
See.
There's a bird. Yeah.
He has the red thing.
Yeah, he's got some red berries.
He has some back around.
Yeah, okay. All right. That was the story about Jericho and the walls.
So I can close it.
All right. Say goodbye.
Bye.